Hello, my name is Judah Ben-Kalti, and I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant with North Horizon Immigration Consulting. Today, I want to talk about work permits. A lot of people email us and ask us, I want to work in Canada, can I get a work permit? Now, this is a very, very complex topic, so I'm going to give you a few tips and some information to give you an idea of what it is that you need in order to get the work permit that you want. The first thing you want to know is that some people can work in Canada without having any work permit. Now, this is very specific. Most of the time, everybody will need a work permit. But let's look at some example. If you are an artist who needs to do a concert in Canada, high chances are you don't need a work permit for that concert. If you are a member of the clergy, you're being invited from a church or a temple to provide services and do sermons, then you don't need a work permit for that. Other times when you don't need a work permit is if you're a student. You have a student permit, you're studying at a university, and you're getting a part-time job anywhere off or on campus, you don't need a work permit for that. Other times that you don't need a work permit are very, very high-skilled jobs. If you're going to come to Canada to work for only 15 days within 6 months or 30 days within an entire year, you do not require a work permit for this kind of job of work. Everybody else, or almost everybody else, will need a work permit. So how do you get this work permit? Rule, which is the general rule, is that Canada wants to protect the workers who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And so before they can issue a work permit to a foreigner, they need to make sure it's not going to impact the chances of a Canadian or a permanent resident of getting that job. This is called the Labor Market Impact Assessment, commonly known as LMIA. So the first thing that happens when a company wants to hire a foreigner, like yourself if you're watching this video, is that that company needs to ask the government, hey, am I allowed to bring a foreign worker? And then they have to justify why they need you, because maybe they can't find this sort of skills that you have. So maybe the company can find workers, but they can't retain them. After 1 or 2 weeks, they leave, they find another job somewhere else, or it's just an industry that's very difficult to keep workers working for a long time. Now, in these situations, if the company can prove to the government it's really difficult for them to have a worker who's already in Canada, then the chances are the government will say, yes, no problem, you can bring this foreigner to work with you. So that's step number 1, getting the LMIA, and it has to be positive. And then with that LMIA, we ask a work permit. This, however, is not the only way to receive work permits. There are also other categories of jobs and companies that can provide a job offer to a foreigner and receive a work permit without the need for an LMIA. I'll give you examples of when this is possible. There is one very common program called Mobilité Francophone, which is for French speakers. The job doesn't require them to speak French, but if they speak French and also some English, and the job is outside of the province of Quebec, then they can get a work permit with a job offer. No need for an LMIA. Another example is the free trade agreements that Canada has with many other nations. So a very common free trade agreement is NAFTA between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And this free trade agreement has a list of occupations for which there is no LMIA requirement. This is also true for other countries like Colombia, Chile, Peru. And finally, I'm going to talk about another type of free trade agreement that falls under the category of intra-company transfer. What happens in these situations is there's a company that exists in one of these countries that has a free trade agreement. For example, the European Union, which is many countries, the European Union has an agreement with Canada that allows workers to transfer from a company that exists in the EU and that has a branch or a sister company or an affiliate, a subsidiary in Canada, and they can transfer workers between the offices without the need of proving that it's not going to affect the labor market in Canada. So these are different ways for people to receive this work permit without the LMIA. There's a few other programs that are probably not the best ones to plan your life around because they're a little bit more of a random selection kind of program. They're called working holiday programs, and not all the countries are in this list. But if you do have the possibility of joining such a program, usually you have to be between the ages of 18 to 30 or 35. It varies between the countries. And it's a work permit that will be an open work permit for 1 to 2 years, depending on which countries. And those ones don't require the LMIA. They usually don't require a job offer either, but it's more of a random selection. So that one is, you have to try your luck to see if you get it. Another way that a person can receive a work permit without an LMIA is if they are the spouse of of a person who has a work permit or a student permit. So this means if it's a couple, there's two of you, and you're either married or you're in a common law relationship, meaning you've lived together for minimum 12 months, then one of you can study, or if one of you gets a work permit, the other one will also receive an open work permit to be with them in Canada. There's a few rules about this. For example, the job has to be a highly qualified job for the spouse to be able to get a work permit, but this is something you have to analyze, case by case. Now, there is two other special ways that people can receive work permits without the LMIA, and this would be if a person came to Canada and is waiting for an answer on a refugee claim that they have made. So when people come to Canada and request a refugee status, there's a period of waiting while they prepare the application and the government is reviewing it and they get a hearing and they get a final answer. During that whole time, they may receive a work permit so they can work while they wait. And finally, the other way of having this work permit without the LMIA is now very, very special cases when a person is in Canada and finds themselves in a situation of a little bit of a crisis and they cannot sustain themselves in any other way but through working. So this is, again, extremely special cases. This is not something that anybody can just choose and say, oh, well, I really need to work, so here, I want to apply for this. No. This is, for example, an international student comes to Canada and is receiving money from their family abroad, sending them money every month so that they can keep studying. But if all of a sudden there is a huge financial crisis in their country of origin and the banks close down and they're not allowing the family to send the student any money, or there's a huge crisis and there's a devaluation of the money abroad and now the person in Canada is not able to use the money that they received from their family to survive in Canada. In those very specific situations, the person may request a work permit and tell the government, I have to stop studying and I have to work for some time and I can't go back to my country because there's a war or there's a crisis. So these are the extreme situations when a person can request a work permit without the LMIA and without a job offer as well. So this is it for the video today. I think the biggest lesson or the biggest idea that I want you to have is it's not just having a job offer that will allow you to have a work permit. So especially if you're abroad, the first step most of the time is going to be receiving an LMIA first. And if you do not have the ability to get the LMIA because maybe the employer doesn't want to do the LMIA process, then we invite you to go to our website. We have a page where we explain each one of these programs in a little bit more details, and you can see if your profile matches one of those programs. You can email us and we can help you evaluate the job offer that you received and what's the best way to request a work permit.